Hi, this is Caleb Lee, and thanks for joining me on this episode of Conversations with Caleb Lee. Now, personally, I tremendously respect doctors, but at the same time, reserve a healthy dose of skepticism. Doctors are humans, and humans make mistakes. I start with that because, as you can guess, my next guest is a doctor. And even though he's a good friend of mine, I couldn't help but bring my level of skepticism to the conversation. Randy Gao is finishing up his last year of his fellowship, which is an extended residency, and he's dedicated hundreds of thousands of dollars and pretty much all of his 20s so that he wouldn't make mistakes. The stakes are definitely higher. With this healthy dose of skepticism, but also deep respect with the moral ethics that come with being a doctor, I interviewed Randy, asking him specifically about his insights as to being a doctor, on the industry, what he would change, and my favorite, how his worldview and beliefs affect his profession as a doctor. Thanks again, and without further ado, enjoy the conversation with Randy Gao. Randy, thank you so much for this interview. And usually I like to just start off by letting you introduce yourself. So what you do, you can go specific, but why don't you tell whoever might be listening?
So yeah, I'm a gastroenterologist, also an internist too. For people who don't know, it's a specialty of medicine where
you can talk to me. You don't have to.
Oh, okay.
Or yeah.
All right. So I'm a gastroenterologist and an internist, whereas after med school you specialize. So I chose internal medicine as my specialty, and then to further subspecialize, I chose gastroenterology, which is your digestive system from your mouth all the way down.
Why'd you choose that one?
Well, I chose internal medicine because I like the thinking part of it. You still take care of patients, and you get to think it over, see the big picture, and tie everything together. And it's a very rewarding process to see the patients and see their treatment outcomes. And then I chose gastroenterology because I still want to do some procedures, do some hands-on. And with gastroenterology, you see outcomes with the procedure. You can actually treat the problem, and it's satisfying at the end of the day. And it's a great field that's advancing, a lot of cool equipment coming out.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's versus where you're not really dealing with the patient as much, maybe like radiology.
Exactly, radiology, pathology, great fields, but just wasn't suitable for me.
Gotcha. Okay. So tell me in a minute or less your average day.
Average day, I think similar for a lot of doctors. You start off what we call rounds, where you kind of see your patients in the hospital. You see how they're doing. Then you write your notes, you check up on labs as you're writing the notes. And then in the hospital for patients, for me, we sometimes do procedures on people who need to. And then that's typically the day that could take up the whole day. Sometimes we also have a clinic in the middle of the day where we go to our office and we see patients in the office. And we could do clinic procedures in the office or at other centers too.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
What time does rounds usually start for you?
Usually starts around 7, and then the day kind of varies. You get out usually earliest at 5. Sometimes it could go later.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Does your daily schedule vary, or is it like you start this time, you end at this time?
It varies depending. You have some control over what you want to do, and especially when you're done with our training, you become attending. You're kind of your own boss.
Okay.
If you want to start your day at 5, 6 because you're an early person, then you could do it. If you want to start a little bit later, 8 or 9, that's fine. Some people are workaholics; they want to work more.
Yeah.
It's really variable.
Gotcha. So there's one thing about doctors that I feel like people know about but don't experience it so much, but like being on call, right?
Yeah.
That's like a staple part of being a doctor.
Yeah.
I feel like what differentiates just a normal 9 to 5 or
Yeah.
8 to 6. What is being on call, and like, is it as brutal as people say it is?
It could be pretty bad. It depends on your specialty.
Okay.
It's different when you're in training, being on call, and for different specialties. For residents, usually being on call is to be in the hospital, like being on call, whereas you're just there a little bit longer, and then you have to do a little bit more work, see more patients. Sometimes it's 16 hours, sometimes it's 24 hours, that type of thing. And it's just a little bit extra hours,
Okay.
just to cover more. So because other people have to go home, you cover their shift for a little bit longer. Other specialties where call is a little bit different, where you don't need to be at the hospital all the time, you take home call. So for GI or for even cardiology, you could go home. But if any urgent issues from the hospital come up, you might have to go back and see the patients or do a procedure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. There's one thing that I feel like, because I interviewed this one other friend who is a doctor, and they're really good at least my friend, like, this was when he was still in like the 4 years of med school. He was like almost downplaying like how bad it was. Not how bad it was, but he would say like, yeah, we studied a lot, and that was it on studying. But like, the whole part was, dude, you were studying for like 90% of the day, and you can kind of just say, yeah, it was a lot of studying.
You get used to it.
Yeah,
it's just like, this is life.
Yeah.
Like, they slowly transition, they build you up, like, this is bad. You're like, okay, this is bad. I'm just going to accept this.
Okay.
Yeah. If you're not prepared, then you probably can't handle it. But, medicine, it's about determination to the point of stupidity. Whereas, like, I'm going to do this, and then, you just kind of grit your teeth and get through it.
Sure.
I don't think it's remarkably hard if you just are able to endure the long years of training.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is a lot, because you have 4 years of actual med school.
Yeah.
And then 3 to like 7 years, depending on your specialty.
Yeah.
Right? Residency and the fellow. Which is insane, man.
Yeah.
Because you're trading off your 20s essentially to get that MD.
Yeah.
Just in some minds, I guess, a big sacrifice. But I have a couple questions here. I know you're still doing your fellowship. Can you explain real quick what 10 seconds, what a fellowship is?
Fellowship, it's, after residency, you want to specialize more. So going into something else like gastroenterology, cardiology, there's, hundreds of different fellowships. But in internal medicine, that's what you can do, specialize a little bit more.
Why do people go into, and let me know if I'm kind of ignorant to this, if everyone ends up opening up their own practice, or do people generally have this, do they weigh out, should I just stay in the hospital, or how does that process look like, and how has it played out for you so far?
Yeah, looking for jobs is, it's changing. The fields of medicine itself completely changing, whereas new grads just hanging up a shingle and saying, hey, this is my practice, it's kind of far and few in between.
Okay.
Most people are joining practices, private practice that's established, because it's just easier. And then you kind of build up your reputation from there. There's also hospital settings. A lot of hospitals are buying up other practices and expanding. So it's also, it's more, I guess, competition for just the private world. Sometimes it's harder to compete when you have a hospital system that sometimes have their own insurance and have a large referral base. So it's a changing dynamic, but it's just harder and harder for just one solo practitioner of anyone to kind of practice on their own.
And we're going to go into that a little bit later, because I wanted to kind of talk about with you trends that you're seeing for doctors, and that can encompass from reimbursements to what insurance relationships are like, to if it's even going to be viable to have your own private practice like that down the road.
Yeah.
And I think you've answered maybe some of that already, but yeah, we'll jump to that in a little bit. I want to go into kind of people that your colleagues. Now, of course, no name dropping or anything like that, unless it's warranted where they did something amazing or awesome. But more of generally, what kind of people do you feel like are drawn to the medical field?
What type of people? I've met so many different personalities along the way. Some are, I think just, it's so broad. People I've met, hardworking. I've met lazy people. I've met brilliant people, and I've met people who I kind of question their intelligence.
And these are MDs, right?
Yeah. I wouldn't categorize, any single personality or trait or type of people or ethnicity. Just doctors are just very diverse. Different backgrounds, different religions, and things like that.
That was actually one of my later questions, like how many people, or I have to be careful how to phrase it, but if your mom or your wife got sick with something, as a whole, and I'm sure it's not just you, but I'm sure a lot of doctors would say, yeah, I'm not sending them to that doctor. And you have in your mind people like, okay,
for sure.
Yeah, so doctors know more than us general folk who don't see the inside of it. So if you were to just kind of put a number on it, and you don't have to answer it, but percentage-wise, like how many would you actually trust with your closest?
With my closest? Depends on what problem. And because I'm limited into the hospitals I cover.
True.
So, it depends. Maybe I have like one or two for each field.
Okay.
But and also, it depends on what hospital they go to. If they go to this hospital that I don't like, I'll be like, maybe you should transfer out of there. I think it's for the best. Yeah, it's not every doctor's the same.
Okay.
Right. Not every hospital's the same.
Right.
We have our limitations as humans, and we have the great physician of Christ, who set us the example of what the perfect healer should be, and we all fall short.
That's I'm glad you brought that up, because medicine is twofold. As much as modern medicine has achieved a ton, even if we're able to cure things like cancer, not all of them, but a lot of them, I feel like there's still this spiritual, emotional, personal aspect of medicine that's easily dismissed, at least in Western medicine. And so you mentioned before the Great Commission, like you mentioned Christ, and I want to go back to that too. As we go deeper into your personal life. So I'm going to make a mental note of that, but a little bit more just on assumptions of doctors. So we did go into, your general idea of doctors and how many you make a mental check of, okay, I know in that industry or that field, that's the doctor I'm going to. So for someone who's a layman like me, how would you advise that person to say, hey, you should do your due diligence, but how much can they actually do and how should they go about it?
Yeah, you don't. Some people have great ratings online. Like people are yelping doctors, but that doesn't mean they're competent.
Right.
So you just have to trust that what people tell you are true and accurate, and I guess see for yourself as well, and not to discredit any doctor, but also to know that sometimes you have to think for yourself as well as the patient.
Is it reasonable for me to, let's say I have to get, or my parents have to get certain surgery, and in that industry, is it weird if I go to another doctor and not, well, of course, let's say I did my second opinion
Yeah.
and third opinion,
Mm-hmm.
and say, hey, this doctor's going to do surgery
Yeah.
on my mom,
Yeah.
let's say, for example. And is it okay if I ask that doctor, hey, what do you think of that doctor doing surgery on my mom? Is that a weird?
Like a completely different doctor, not associated with your mom's care. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
So asking like a friend.
Well, no, not so much of a friend, but let's say in the same hospital.
Yeah.
I don't know how many doctors there are that have the same specialty.
Yeah.
Or maybe not. Maybe not.
Yeah.
Let's say, hey, I go up to you
Yeah.
for whatever surgery that might be done.
Yeah.
And if you weren't my friend, let's say, hey, what do you think of that doctor doing surgery on my mother?
I mean, I don't think we would talk poorly
Okay.
of people. Yeah, I don't think anyone would say, well, maybe, but it's not common for anyone to talk poorly of a colleague.
Yeah.
I don't think that's right. It's kind of like me asking you, hey, John Doe is going to interview me.
Yeah.
He runs a podcast too. What do you think of him? Is he like super shady, or like does he ask good questions? Should I like do it if he's like also, reputable?
Well, I feel like and that's I'm glad you made that example, because a podcast, it's, there's going to be good ones and bad ones. Same with doctors, there's going to be good ones and bad.
Yeah.
But let's say like there's a surgery that's really, it could be life-threatening, and almost all surgeries are.
Yeah.
Not to so much talk down on a doctor, but to say, would you have that doctor perform surgery on your mom?
If the advising doctor doesn't know you too well, I don't think they would give a strong opinion.
Okay.
And like as a friend,
Yeah.
I would give you my
Solid opinion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Of what I thought.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Makes sense. And it really, the idea behind that is, let's say, someone's listening and they've gone to a bunch of doctors and that doctor messed up on a surgery, and they just want a little bit more feedback maybe on the inside. But from what you're saying is, get to know that person first instead of going around trying to get, credentials and resumes, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and just see how the rapport.
Yeah.
A lot of it, I mean, doctors have to be a certain quality. And they have to pass their boards.
Of course.
They have to maintain their license and get through med school and training. So there at least is a bare minimum in play, and there's still variation between even that. But at least there is a floor. To support them. So with that, I think you should still trust the doctor, and instead of shopping around. A lot of shopping around produces discontinuity of care, and you're going to get redundant workup, redundant bills, and imaging and testing, which could hurt your care ultimately. So that could be a problem too, with the just mistrust of the healthcare system.
Yeah. And I'm gonna credit it to just the way my parents raised me, and if you break a bone, it's like, yeah, it'll heal, and it's very that Asian immigrant kind of mindset, which of course I don't condone, but I think it's instilled in me a healthy dose of skepticism for those who are in the industry. So that's kind of like where I'm coming from. But I'm gonna switch gears. And I said I'd want to go back to your thoughts, your insights on the industry. Now, we kind of touched upon it, like people generally don't start their own practice out of med school. They join a private practice. So my question, I really just have two questions in regards to this. One is, what is your general outlook on the industry, the field of MD? And the second part, you can maybe tie it in if you want. Do you feel like AI is going to have any impact on that? What is your general notions on this?
Well, I could start with the AI because I think that's a easier question. For some fields, it's helpful. For things that are, I guess, hands-on. I don't think AI could really replace that. It's hard to develop the fine motor skills of a surgeon and to safely test it consistently in a patient. Now there is robotic surgery where people could do surgery like yards away or in a completely another different location. And that's helped surgery, but I don't think it would get rid of the surgeon altogether. And maybe sometimes down the future we have software systems that could read like x-rays, CAT scans, and things like that, but you still would need probably a radiologist to verify and things like that. So I don't think it'll completely get rid of the doctor. It would just help and make things safer and make our lives easier. With the changing of the healthcare, I think technology will, shape things and research. But I think the bigger issue is a lot of the what healthcare industry is facing with finance and that type of reforms with insurance, Medicare, Medicaid, which is always the big elephant in the room, of how healthcare reform will change. It's one of the hot topics of changing the Affordable Care Act or reducing it. There's, the debate could go on and on if it's a good thing or not. Ultimately, it's about driving down costs for the healthcare and how to do it. There's many different ways of doing it. I'm not sure which is the right way, which is the wrong way. I think one way to help with seeing doctors and seeing how other doctors practice is there's a lot of defensive medicine going on, where we are scared of repercussions of getting sued. So there's a lot of defensive medicine, whereas you just test for everything and you over-test, just so you don't miss anything, and you kind of redo it, and that just drives up the cost. And that's kind of a response of getting sued and the ramifications of that. So it's kind of like a feedback.
I didn't know that,
where the test is high, the cost is high, and they place the blame on physicians, and physicians place the blame on the legal system, and it just goes back and forth. So, that's maybe one way of changing things, but it's going to be hard to change the mentality of the physicians, changing of the patients and the legal system.
Yeah, and it's almost too bad, because I remember my recent experience was I had my knee checked out, and the orthopedic surgeon just ran x-ray before anything, right? And I understand that, but that's kind of what you're talking about. And, of course, I asked the staff, and they don't know what the insurance details are, the fine print. Next thing you know, I get a bill for that x-ray, and I'm like, I have the premium healthcare that's associated with the hospital. Why am I getting this bill for an x-ray? And it kind of goes back to leaving a bitter taste in your mouth for the patient's end and also for the doctor's end, where they could just get sued for not having done it, even though it wasn't necessary. So
you're lucky you didn't get MRI with it too. That would put you back a couple thousand.
I already had an MRI done, so that's why I did do that.
There you go.
Which, both barely showed any results, but anyways, that's for a different story. There was a question that I had written down, but I kind of skipped over. But you brought it up too, and I think it's important that we go into it, because it was in my section of insights where the residency process, the whole, and I know people who have burnt out during the residency process. First of all, so if you can explain in a nutshell what the whole thing is, why people get burnt out, and why we read so many articles about residents who commit suicide. I mean, I think once a year,
Yeah.
one article pops up, and then you dig into it, and you realize like a dozen people have killed themselves in that year alone.
Yeah.
So if you could describe that a little bit.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate. It's sad that it happens. It's a very high pressure field, especially compounded with the work hours. There's a cap on 80 hours a week. A lot of specialties go over it. And a lot of programs go over the 80 hours. And you have, dealing with patients, and you have, your own problems. We're human too. We deal with sickness, mental sickness, physical ailments, and just a lot of pressures going on. And yeah, there's a high burnout rate, and suicide is definitely something that no one wants to see. But it's not something that we could just keep brushing under the rug. It's definitely there. Burnout, it could happen in any profession.
Did you experience burnout?
Yeah. Burnout, so it's to the point where you feel just tired, where you feel kind of like you are not able to do your job properly. And it makes you question of why you want to do this field. I think a lot of people have had it. There are points where, not where I questioned, but I was just very tired. And sometimes, I think it could affect my patient care. Maybe not to the point where I'm providing poor care, but just how I'm talking to the patient is not in a loving manner. And I'm definitely losing the fruit of the spirit, where I'm not patient, I'm not loving, I'm not gentle, I'm not kind. I'm, guilty of breaking all those. So yeah, burnout is definitely very real, and it's there.
If you can describe a little bit more what that actually looks like, because I think we can all share what it feels like to be overburdened.
Yeah.
Tired, but I think there's something specific when you're talking about being burned out as a resident, right? It's more than just your patient tolerance, and the way you were mentioning the fruits of the Holy Spirit, more than those things, which is a big indicator. Those are red flags if all those are going out the window. What does that kind of thought process sound like, if you can think of something specific?
I mean, it's really, the way you deal with the patient, instead of taking time to talk to them, you might feel rushed and not do take a full history, which you adequately should do. And you might, cut corners, just so you could get your work done, because you start losing the joy, and you don't, sometimes you don't want to do it at all. And then it's almost having like a depressed type of mood. Right. I wouldn't say depression, because that's definitely a real clinical diagnosis. Right. But you have sad moods where you start losing your joy in things, and you kind of drag your feet along, and you just don't look forward to working. I think it happens. Yeah,
and going back to, we mentioned the suicide rate of residents, and it's crazy to me because you guys made it through med school. First of all, getting in is just a whole battle in itself.
Yeah.
Getting through it is just another battle in itself. So you've already overcome 2 pretty big mountains, including the steps. And then it's like, you've made it. You got that residency you wanted. And the last case I remember, it was at a reputable school in New York.
Right.
And it's just like, you're living the dream. So why are these people committing suicide? And I think, but I'm prying more because I think a lot of people feel overworked, but 80, 80 hours is just a number. We don't know what it looks like to work 80 hours for months on end.
Right.
So that's why I was trying to get more than just losing joy.
Yeah.
Is there more to it?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's a high suicide rate. I actually don't know the residency suicide rate.
Okay. Gotcha.
Off the top of my head. Yeah, I mean, you could fact check me. I don't want to give false facts.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's that much higher compared to the general population.
Okay.
But it's still something that's alarming. I know the burnout rate has been definitely high, and that's a concern.
Okay.
A lot of physicians, I've read reports like 40%, up to 50% of physicians report burnout in their career.
Right.
With that being said, a lot of times, think about when you're working many hours, you kind of put what you need to do, your life on hold.
Yeah.
Where if you're working so many hours and you come home exhausted, you don't have time to properly cook a meal, to go out to exercise, to see family or friends. You're just so exhausted.
Yeah.
So sometimes you lose taking care of yourself, your social support, and you might not have time to even see doctors for your own appointments. So you kind of neglect yourself. That's what happens, and one thing leads to another, and it's hard to pick yourself back up sometimes.
Yeah. Man, so burnout, again, just to reiterate, the way I see it is you've lost whatever drives you have to do what you got to do.
Yeah.
And symptoms of depression, physically, just your body not being at its peak anymore.
Yeah.
Mentally, you're exhausted, so you can't even properly do your job. These are kind of the symptoms of burnout, right?
No, I'm glad you said your drive.
Yeah.
Because I think that's important in whatever you do, not just medicine. What drives you?
Yeah.
What is your driving motive? Is it for your prestige, money? Is it just to satisfy your parents, or because you want to, get the MD degree? Is what really drives you. Yeah. And I think that's what sustains you in the end.
And that's a perfect segue into your personal life. Now, if anyone's made it this far, I'm pretty sure they'll know. Yeah. Actually, not even the first 10 seconds they'll know, because we opened in prayer.
Yeah.
And spirituality, personal life, being a doctor, and how all those things kind of coalesce. I'm really, really curious about that. So, what is your personal beliefs, your personal worldview? As specifically as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that Christ died for me, that I'm a sinner, and without Christ, apart from Christ, that I am damned to hell. I believe that the only way through salvation is through Christ and His blood. And I believe in the Holy Trinity. I believe in full baptism, and I believe in the doctrine of grace, and that we are saved by grace alone, apart from our works.
And we kind of alluded to this outside of the prayer. We also kind of talked about what was it that you brought up again? Caring not just for the body, but also for the soul, right? So with these beliefs that you have, and you mentioned also the fruits of the Spirit.
Yeah.
How does being a Christian for you differentiate, and it doesn't have to be physical differentiations or manifestations, but how do you as a doctor now kind of in a sense digest your profession or interpret your profession as a Christian, as someone who believes that they're saved through grace alone?
Yeah. Externally, it's hard to show it, although that's definitely something that I have to work on myself.
What do you
that
mean you have to work
we
on?
have to be light of the world, right?
Okay.
In Matthew 5. That we are salt of the world, we are light of the world, that we are witnesses no matter what we are doing. You know, in John 17, we are in the world, but not of the world, right? We're put here for a reason, and we have to be different and to witness to others. Sometimes it's too easy to take the highway out and blend in.
As a doctor in a hospital,
Yeah.
are there things that prevent you from being the salt and light?
Yeah, I think so. You know, it's kind of the unwritten rule where you shouldn't be talking about your religion in the hospital. I don't think it's, really enforceable, but people get uncomfortable sometimes when you kind of, approach people about your religion. It's kind of counterintuitive, whereas it's kind of like the perfect place to share your belief. But it's also kind of frowned down upon. People need God very much so in the hospital in their most vulnerable moments. But it's not something that's readily done for many reasons, including just time. That you don't have time to just sit down with somebody, and sometimes they're so overworked you can't share the gospel. The other day, though, I had a patient before my procedure that we were about to do on him. He grabbed my hand and he prayed with me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did he know you were a Christian?
No. Yeah.
He just grabbed your hand and started
praying? He grabbed
praying?
my hand and started praying.
Wow.
Yeah, I was very taken back, and it was wonderful. And I wish that I could pray more with patients.
That's fascinating because, like you said before, it is a place where people need God.
Yeah.
And it's funny because people who are healthy are the ones who are like, yeah, God is a crutch.
Yeah.
But then as soon as something catastrophic happens, it's suddenly you realize no amount of willpower is going to get you through anything. Sometimes a lot of things are out of your control.
Yeah.
But with all that said, are there actual laws where it's kind of to say that you're not supposed to talk about that, or maybe patients can lash out at you for trying to bring that up?
Yeah, I mean, I think some patients might get offended, but we live in a country that has the First Amendment.
Yep.
And we're allowed to, view our beliefs, and which is something that we're very blessed to have.
Right.
Yeah.
How is your beliefs? Well, now this question I feel like would probably be more relevant to, let's say, someone who's ER or a surgeon, surgeon, but I'm sure you've had your fair share of death, more than the average person. How has that affected you as an individual?
I still remember the first patient that I saw pass away in med school. It's a very eye-opening experience, and that will definitely be with me for a very long time. You realize that, wow, God gives and God takes away. Praise be to God that we are dust, and we just give glory to God. And that really makes me appreciate my profession a lot more, and the other doctors who deal with it. But going forth, and you kind of see it pretty often in residency, working in the ICU, where people pass away maybe every other day or every day.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, ICU, you got the sickest people. So then you kind of become a little bit jaded.
Yeah.
Whereas, this happens. So that part, you have to become a little bit hardened into it, because you see it so often, And if you get broken down, then you really can't last in the field.
But what a strange contrast.
Yeah.
Not just to be alive and to get jaded to death.
Yeah.
But then on top of that, now we believe in heaven and hell.
Yeah.
You see people dying around you all the time.
Yeah.
Based off of what you're saying.
Yeah.
But you still have to kind of be jaded to that too.
Yeah.
So that's,
It's,
mental. I can't imagine how much compartmentalizing
Yeah.
you're doing.
Yeah.
To get through the day.
It's rough. It's rough. But that's why I don't work in the ICU anymore.
Okay.
So
Gotcha.
yeah, definitely a lot less dying around me these days with
Right.
gastroenterology. Hopefully keeping more people alive.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this my last note is generally advice you might have for aspiring doctors. It could be someone who's either in college or wants to make a career shift later in their life. And I'm gonna bang these out. So whatever you feel like giving advice to.
Yeah.
Current patients with doctors you feel like they might want to change or get a second opinion. Just kind of, I don't know if there's anything there.
Okay.
Current medical students and Christian doctors. So I'll leave this here if you want.
Yeah, I'll address the Christian doctors and doctors, or just anyone just working. I think we have to work for the glory of God. Which is the driving factor of our lives. That we are made to praise God and glorify God. And as Jesus prayed in John chapter 17, the high priestly prayer, where he prayed to glorify the Son so the Father may be glorified. The ultimate goal is to glorify God. And I'll read Galatians 2:20, which helps me get through tough days, for sure. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. I think it's a good reminder, it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. That our will is not of our own will, but of God. It's God's power, sovereign grace working in us. Nothing of our own power, nothing of our own doing.
It's encouraging to meet, a doctor who, because I think there's a loosely held assumption that people who are these days in STEM or just medicine sciences are generally atheistic or agnostic. But to, you're strong in your faith, and that's very encouraging. And I'm sure there are people who have doubted a lot, questioned to an extent where, very philosophical questions. But here you are at one point in your life around death, physically around death. So who better to question when you see people dying around you, the bigger question of why are we all alive? And what else is there after this life? And so it's very encouraging, and I thank you so much for sharing that.
Thanks for having me, Caleb.
Yeah, man, this is a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks for joining me on this episode of Conversations with Caleb Lee. Don't forget to check out my website at gcaleblee.com. That's GCALEBLEE.com to watch some of the videos of the exact interviews you just listened to. Also, don't forget to subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode and this show series. Lastly, I want to invite any listeners to join me to be a guest on my show. Whether over Skype or in person, I'd be glad to accommodate for what works best for you. If you'd like to join me, reach out to me on my contact page on my website, or you can find me on Twitter at gcaleblee. You know what? Even if you don't want to be a part of the podcast, I would still love to hear your feedback. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll join you on the next episode of Conversations with Caleb Lee.